spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. It's just tweet your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak my mind. Oh. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, oh,
Slog, and I will call this meeting of the Transportation and Circulation Committee to order at 5:30 p.m. Can we have the roll call, please?
Committee Member Blackerby?
Here.
Committee Member Metzenberg?
Here.
Committee Member Rodriguez?
Here.
Committee Member Smith?
Here.
Vice Chair Bakke?
Here.
Chair Seedsley?
Here.
Committee Member Bickford is absent. We have a quorum.
All right. And Ms. Grant, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, we do not.
All right. And so now we will open the floor to general public comment. So any member of the public may address the committee for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the committee that is not scheduled for public discussion on the agenda. Do we have any speakers today?
We have no speakers.
All right. Ms. Grant, do we have any announcements?
Yes, we have one announcement. The announcement is concerning the State Street Master Plan effort. I spoke with the State Street Master Planner, Tess Harris. It is my understanding from her, that the master planning effort will return on April 28th to City Council for an update. No actions, just update, and I don't have any more information beyond that, but there will be a staff report released a week, usually the Thursday prior to a Tuesday hearing. So I encourage you all to take a look and see what's going to be presented.
All right, and thank you. We will move on to our consent items. Our first item is for the approval of the minutes for December 4th, 2025. Do we have any motions to approve?
So moved.
All right, motion from Vice Chair Bakke. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, second. All in favor say aye. Any opposed,
Aye.
nay?
I'll abstain.
Okay, and motion carries. So next we have our administrative item. The first is the election of the chair and vice chair for the calendar year 2026. Do we have any motions for, I guess, do we do them one at a time, or should we?
Yes, we could nominate one at a time, and then for those that potentially would be interested in the chair, vice chair responsibility, you wouldn't immediately go into chairing the meeting tonight. It would be starting at the next hearing, which is scheduled in April. And then typically the time commitment, depending upon what's on the agenda, is a briefing with staff ahead of the meeting, usually nothing more than a half an hour, just so you can gauge time commitment.
All right, so we can start with nominations for chair. I will nominate Vice Chair Ian Bakke for chair for the next year. Is there a second?
Second. Sure. Second.
I'll say second from Committee Member Blackerby. And all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Do we have a nomination for vice chair?
Yes, I would like to nominate Sarah for vice chair.
Is there a second?
I second that. Second.
All right, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? And motion carries. All right, we'll move into our second item. Ms. Grant, if you could introduce the item.
Yes, excited to bring you tonight this continuation of the Safe Streets for All planning effort. This has really been comprising a lot of the agendas really for the past year, and will continue through into April as well. And potentially longer, but that is the schedule right now. And then the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review some of the draft chapters. And as you recall, when we kicked this effort off in August, I guess, of 2024, we wanted to try this planning effort a little bit differently, because a lot of times in plans, you see the entire plan at one time. And that can be extremely overwhelming, especially on this particular planning effort where we really wanted to take the time to go over, well, what's the existing situation in terms of our collision history, what have we been doing, and so we appreciate you all being patient and taking various chapters at different times. So tonight is, there's quite a bit of material to review. And some of these chapters are, only a couple pages and some are longer. But the goal of the plan also is to not have a planning document that looks like the size of a doorstop, the size of a dictionary. We do really want it to be easy and digestible to read. So these are the following chapters that we'll be going over tonight. And then there was a couple of appendices that we'll also touch on that will be part of future chapters coming in April for your review. And as far as tonight's meeting, as far as the structure, because a lot of times we do have the longer staff presentation, then we go into questions and comments. Just to make this, I think, easier, we'd like to just introduce which each chapter is about, what the intent is and direction from the grant requirements, and then go into questions and comments. And then we will basically take the first 4 chapters, and then we'll break for public comment, just so if members of the public don't have to stay here for the entirety of the meeting, but we'll break for comment again for those members of the public that might be here or watching remotely, if there's any additional feedback from that. So, yes.
Excuse me, I'm not clear. Are you going to take our questions between each chapter or wait till the floor?
Yes. So each chapter, for example, the first one will be leadership, commitment, and goal setting. I'll describe what the directions from the federal government grant requirements are, what we put in the chapter that we think are satisfying, maybe if there's things that we added to that chapter that might be different from the federal requirements. And as we were writing these chapters, maybe certain difficulties for staff of what we were trying to convey for messaging, that type of thing. And then we'll go immediately into questions from the committee, and then comments. And then after that, then we'll move on to the next chapter. And then for those that might be new to the process, that are watching remotely or here, from the public, again, we received a federal grant back in fall of 2024 to complete an action plan. This action plan is really served to prevent traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries within the city while increasing safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all by strategically identifying infrastructure improvements that remove barriers to safe mobility. And then, as a requirement, we are required by this particular grant to have a completed plan adopted by council no later than September of 2026. And then the graphic to the left are all the required chapters that per the federal guidelines for this action plan. And the items with a star next to it is ones that we will be covering tonight. And what we've covered already in the past is the safety analysis, the past and present approach to traffic safety, and we've included components of engagement and collaboration, which has really been ongoing throughout this planning effort. So let's go into the first chapter. So the first chapter is really the introduction, leadership, commitment, and goal setting. Before I launch into this too, I we're not the first action plan that's being put together. This grant has been going on for at least 2 or 3 cycles, and they finally have a clearinghouse for all of the safety action plans across the United States, and so and links to those various action plans. And so we always like to look at other jurisdictions to see what we like, what we don't like, how are they graphically showing certain items. And so a lot of our chapters as we go through each chapter, I'll say maybe kind of what we're modeled after from other jurisdictions, which we liked. And we looked at a lot of California-related action plans at coastal cities or cities of our general size. All right, so for this particular chapter, leadership and commitment and goal setting, that's just basically the very first chapter of this whole action plan and what the vision statement would be, and then public commitment. So public commitment for the federal grant requirements is that it's the city council, basically an adopted resolution. So it's very common on all of our planning efforts beyond this one that you typically always have an adopted resolution with the council that they are endorsing the plan. And what was also required was to have a target date or percentage reduction of achieving 0 roadway fatalities and serious injuries. So what we included for that, because we are a Vision Zero city, in our Vision Zero strategy, it did adopt 2030 as the target year, and we felt like we shouldn't change that year at this time. That we have been actively working on our roadway network, and so at this point in time, that's what we have written in the draft, is still keeping with the 2030 year. And then the draft resolution, the only thing I actually really like the city of Palo Alto, so near Stanford University, in the Bay Area. I liked a lot of their statements, so I used some of their statements, but again, made it Santa Barbara specific. But the one thing that was different, and one thing that we struggled with, is we wanted to include some information about complete streets. And if you were to read our circulation plan or circulation element, the pedestrian master plan, bicycle master plan, Vision Zero, it screams complete streets with a lot of the policies in there, but it doesn't actually say that word, complete streets. I think there was, when the general plan was adopted in 2011, there was maybe one sentence in some of the adopting resolution, but it wasn't, I think, as we know, complete streets are what we see in other jurisdictions, probably to the level of satisfaction. So we wanted to include that at a minimum in the resolution. And I think that's something, as we go into the future chapters or policies, do we want to take it a step further? For example, City of San Luis Obispo, they have it in their ordinance language. So like a future policy could be like, please create ordinance language to include that type of messaging. And so, and then basically for what complete streets means is that when you're evaluating a roadway, you're looking through the lens of all mobility users for safety. So with that, I'll hand it off to the chair to facilitate any questions.
All right, we will start with questions from the committee, and then once we finish questions, we'll go into comments from the committee. So do we start off with any questions on this section? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple questions about some of the language in the resolution. So I think it's after all the whereases, it's in the therefore section 2 of integrating the complete street principles. So there's a bit of a caveat at the end. So they shall incorporate complete street design elements unless a documented engineering justification demonstrates that such elements are infeasible. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what the triggers are for that. Is it fiscal limitations, just legal or space limitations like fire code and stuff, or is it also potentially veering maybe into more policy considerations about, oh, well, this street, we're a little bit more wary about doing the full treatment for, congestion consideration or something like that?
Yes, that's a great question. I think for us, and I agree, like, yes, should we expand on what it means when it says infeasible? I think what we struggle with, and just in everyday designing of our infrastructure projects, is there's always, what does the textbook say from NACTO guidelines, AASHTO guidelines, MUTCD? And then what does it look like in practice? Because again, you can't cover every single scenario and crown of a road, certain items as to why we can design a certain access ramp the way the exact textbook example said. So I kind of see that where it says infeasible, it's probably on a case-by-case basis. But we can flag that to see if we could tease that out a little bit more in the language.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that would probably be helpful in case someone one day has a difference of opinion. They can have
Yes.
something to point to. And then, let's see. So I just, this is also touches on a couple other chapters, like the policy one, but I'm curious about the, like the recommendation for council to get these annual reports, which I think is a great idea, and I know other cities do that, on Vision Zero, for example. So is it I think I saw somewhere that it would be a written report instead of like an actual meeting. Is that the case? And is there any consideration of maybe doing like one actual meeting where they can ask questions, and then maybe even further, like maybe a half year, just like here's a data table of the incident reports?
I think that initially, I think we would want to have it as administrative items that would go before the Transportation Circulation Committee, Police and Fire Commission, and to City Council. As we start to have it over time, does it just go into consent agendas where it's just a report? Potentially, but I think the intent really is to be transparent with our community of what collisions look like and how we can address those and be a safer city. And so I think the intent is to have hearings every year.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought I read somewhere that it would be a written report, so just wanted to clarify that. I think that's great.
Typically, anytime we go to an administrative hearing, it must accompany a written report.
Okay, gotcha.
So
Yeah, I thought it
that's
might
where
be
that
only written.
comes
Got it.
to play.
Cool. All right. I think those are all my questions on this one.
All right, any other questions on this first one? Okay, any committee comments on section 1?
I mean, this is really minor, is that you refer to complete streets there, but you just refer to it. And, I could easily look it up because I was reading it at home, so it was fine. But you might want to flesh it out a little bit like you did for the, for the, I forget what the other word is, but the safe systems or, yeah, anyway. Yeah, just that.
Yeah, thank you for raising that point. There are a fair amount of action plans we came across where they had a couple like definition areas or acronym areas where they define everything. So I think that's a good when we start to go over all the language to make sure that there's that the definitions are in there. Thank you.
Comments?
And don't you want to go? Okay. Yeah, I'll just be quick. This one I wrote down a few just like suggestions. So feel free to respond to these or just leave them out there. So I think, yeah, the complete street requirements I think are super amazing. I know some other jurisdictions have like codified that in ordinance whenever they repave a street, for example. So I think the shall language in here is very encouraging about realizing that and not making sure we don't miss opportunities when we repave a street to do some of the easy wins. So just a comment there. I think it's really essential that we incorporate them in as many projects, restriping projects, pavement projects as possible. On section 4, it's, funding and grant pursuit. This is a comment I've made before. I just think it's great to direct, that council would direct staff to look at federal, state, regional funding opportunities. I would also love, in an ideal world, if this said, and explore local city funding opportunities, because my understanding is we do not have a single city, like, earmarked bucket of money for these kinds of projects. And I think, even just within Measure C, that would be something worth exploring. And there's been a lot of discussion lately out there about what we do with Measure C, post-police station. People are talking about housing. Personally, think that's great, but I don't want us to get too far down the road where we forget about all these unmet needs and program Measure C out for another 10 years. And yeah, I made the comment about, I think the more reporting to council, the better. Definitely at least one in-person meeting a year where they can actually, it's clear they are engaging with the material. And then the more overarching concern I have, I guess, is just about the 2030 goal. I think it's very admirable, and I would love to live in that world. I just, with even, I hate to be a downer, but we've already had a really difficult year just since January here in the city. And I think I would be much more comfortable with, even if we're keeping the 2030 year, also having a percentage decrease that we think is realistic, just so that when this goes out there, it's perceived as something that, if we really get behind this as a community, it could actually be achieved within a realistic time frame. I was just looking at the old data, and I saw, I think a 9% decrease year on year from 2024 would eventually get us to 0 by 2035 if we reach that target. I just wanted to put that out there. I'm curious if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Committee Member Blackerby.
That's me. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I really appreciate in that section 2 about complete streets, the unless a documented engineering justification demonstrates, right? Because if it was just that it's feasible, is it politically feasible? Is it, right? But I want that guy to be yes, it's safe, or it's not, or whatever, right? So that's, I think, extremely important, and something that even just having Vision Zero haven't really gotten there as a city, right? So I think hopefully with this, I also appreciate that the way that this grant program is structured. It's hey, commit to this is really, I think, a good thing. I mean, with regards to 2030 piece, I don't ever think we should be a percentage is acceptable of, injuries or deaths. I know that's not what Vice Chair's saying, but I've gotten in a lot of these conversations over the years about Vision Zero, people being there's no way. I mean, that's crazy. And it's well, you have to have that goal and you have to have that vision. I do wonder, though, now that it's 2026, when we get to 2030, and as this analysis is done every year, what the path, let's say we don't get there, what is the path? And we're not the only city that has a 2030 goal, right? What is the path ultimately? Don't have to answer it now. Of what we do to update that moving forward if we don't get there. Obviously, I hope we do. But if we don't, thinking about that roadmap of what happens next, I think is going to be important. That's all.
Additional comments from the committee? Okay, for my own comments, I don't think I'll say anything new, just echoing other committee members that I do also appreciate that it specifically says unless an engineering, or I'm sorry, the exact wording, unless an engineering solution is not feasible, as opposed to it's financially unfeasible or politically unfeasible, as Committee Member Blackerby said. And then I think similarly, the 2030 language, I do think it's important to have that 2030 goal in there, really just as it is, but I would like to see something additional added as a, even if we do hit the 2030 goal, what happens after, so we're not just kind of having a plan that is done and then we're wandering in the wilderness after that. So, yeah, I think, right, are we ready to move on to our next section?
Great. Thank you. All right, the next section, this is probably the shortest chapter, and it's just about the planning structure. So again, all different jurisdictions across the United States don't have the plethora of committees that our city already has, and so it's really ran the gamut on the different task force, et cetera. So what's wonderful for us, and it really was our Transportation Circulation Committee already in place with a lot of tremendous backgrounds and input, and so that's what we did. We ended up, yes, continuing, as you know, when we kicked off this effort in 2024. And then we have kind of like the subcommittees, so to speak, on certain topic areas. For Police and Fire Commission, there hadn't been a time, at least in my tenure, that we had traffic collisions specifically go before the Fire and Police Commission. So a lot of it was just education for that. And I think it's really important because we all work providing public safety. So it's just part of the messaging. And then with the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, again, a lot of Neighborhood Advisory Committee, and we'll talk about the chapter in equity, but most of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee is representative of sort of the underserved neighborhoods of our city, and that's where we also have had probably the highest amount of collisions from those neighborhoods, and so it was just explaining again what we were seeing in the collision statistics that they saw and what we were putting out to the public in the surveys, and they helped us message the surveys as well. And then, finally, the city council. So any questions on how we formatted this chapter?
Questions from the committee?
I have a quick question. I wasn't clear. Are you saying that the Fire and Police Commission doesn't currently exist, and this will be a new thing?
They do exist. It's just there hadn't, at least to my knowledge in my tenure, there hadn't ever been any crossover when it came to traffic safety, and there's obviously a lot of overlap between safety infrastructure improvements, enforcement, which would be in the police department's realm. And so we thought it was really important for them to hear some of the introductory stuff. So we have been, when we presented the safety collision analysis chapter, now it feels like months ago, we also gave the same presentation to that board.
Good, so this ensures their expanded cooperation, which sounds great. Okay, thank you.
All right. Additional questions? Comments?
Just a brief comment. I don't know if the best place would be for it to be here in the chapter, or if it's part of there's a lot of website updates in this plan that I think are really great. I think just the question this raises for me when I hear all the time is who do I go to if I have an issue with the way my street is, or whether it's a short-term or a long-term problem? Do I go to PED, the SB Connect app, straight to my council member, this committee? Where do I start? So I think any sort of how-to or a flow chart or org chart for those kinds of public concerns would be helpful, either in here or somewhere public-facing.
Additional comments? Oh, sorry.
Great, that's a good comment. I think in the policy section, when we get there, I will put a pin on that. I think that there is a some policies related to education, and I think that could be easily addressed in routine messaging on who to contact him. So let me write that down.
Any additional comments on section 2? All right, I was just gonna add, I think I do appreciate just having it laid out, like, these are the 3, committees or councils or commissions that oversee this area. I know we have a lot, and a lot of it is, every issue goes to every, or feels like it goes to every committee, so, I appreciated this clarity. All right, and I think we can now move on, Ms. Grant, to our next section.
All right, so equity. When we originally applied for this action planning effort, equity component or chapter called Equity Considerations was a required chapter. During the grant, there was administration change, and so equity, as you've probably seen in the news on various different efforts, and this is not, I do not want to take this platform tonight for the hearing to discuss any politics. I just want to just say at this point in time, it's no longer a requirement. We do have like a representative for our state when we have questions about our action planning effort. So I had immediately reached out to them like, okay, what do we do? Do we not have an equity chapter? Because we had promised it was part of our grant scope, which went under contract with the federal government. What do we do? And so her response was that we could include the chapter still, and there wasn't required components within the chapter, so you could make it what you wanted to make it be. And so for us, when we think of equity, I'll say 2 different things. So why is equity important in the first place, and why do so many grants, especially at the state level, have an equity component and federal government? Is because when statistically across the United States, we cited sources in the chapter, but there's 2 kind of common variables. If you're low income and a person of color, you're more likely to be involved in a fatal and severe collision. So to date, other than this change for this particular action plan, that is coming through on a lot of the funding. Like, for example, and I'll discuss that in a minute, for the state's active transportation program, the whole focus in any funding to date since their 2014 cycle, you have to have had met a disadvantaged or community. It would have benefited a disadvantaged community. I struggle with the labeling for under equity because there's lots of different labels and there's lots of different definitions. And so when we were putting this together, we said, well, what would help us most, and maybe for the community reviewing this, is how many different definitions it is of underserved community, disadvantaged community, environmental justice community. And when we're doing our planning efforts, we also don't like to put those labels on our community. Like, it's known or for census, but everybody's just part of our community. So, but anyway, so the discussion in this chapter is really think, well, what's considered right now at this point in time? If we were to go to GIS mapping, what's considered the areas that meet the federal definition? What are the areas that meet the state definition? What meets the regional definition? And so that's how we formatted the chapter. And I'll just show, I did want to highlight a couple of maps. So again, everything in the orange and red, that represents our high injury network, where 88% of the severe and fatal injuries occur. on the city's roadway network, and that represents 20% of the overall roadway. So you'll see on these maps that there's a lot of overlap between our high injury network and the qualifying areas for underserved or disadvantaged. So the areas that are in a color, and this was the interesting part, and I don't want to go into all the details, but of how the federal government, like some of the neighborhoods are definitely what we've seen routinely, but the kind of the waterfront area caught us off guard. It's a qualifying area. The federal government right now is not relying on the 2020 census, it's the 2010 census, and then you kind of go down a spiral, and it's like the easiest way for me is, I think for us, is just, this is the point in time, this is what it is, and if we were still to go after grant funding, we still have to always recheck each of the whatever the latest and greatest mapping is. And then the next one, this is for, like, again, there's lots of criteria for the state. And so with the active transportation program, one of the qualifying areas is for census related, where qualifying census tracts that are less than 80% of the statewide median income. And again, there's quite a bit of our high injury network overlapping those areas. And then this is our regional definition through the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. So some of our grants, including the state's grant, we can use the regional definition. And so this is stratified. If you go onto the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, they have a whole storyboard of what makes up the disadvantaged or environmental justice communities, and they go a lot further than just low income person of color. They'll go by high school education, they'll go by senior population. So there's lots of different categories making up the regional definitions. So, and they're included, I only am highlighting a few maps. There's some more maps in there that we also included. But again, this is helpful for us in context too, when we say, oh, this particular project's not a good candidate, because again, what's only been funded to date is overlapping areas of disadvantaged areas. So it's nice to have, some graphics just for context. So with that, I'll.
We have questions from the committee on this section? Oh, have a few. We'll go to committee member Bickford. All right, committee member Smith, no? Okay, and committee member or vice chair Bakke. All right, no? Thought I saw you all reach. All right, comments.
I do have one.
Okay.
I totally understand where we're at with this, given the federal government and its changing mind on this kind of stuff, and how it is interesting to show it, like how many different definitions and geographic categories there are. I was surprised to learn that on one and only one map, I'm in, one of these areas, but my street is the dividing line, so the people across the street aren't, and I am, which is, raises some thoughts about where we put projects and stuff like that. So I just think for the purposes of including this chapter, I think it would be good if there's some narrative stuff added there about where the city has invested historically and where it hasn't. I don't know how far back you want to go with that, but and what we can learn from that. I think if we're going to include this, that's kind of what I think the goal should be, is informing the community and decision makers of where have we fallen short in the past, what areas have been over invested in relative to others. In addition to these are also very important. They are qualifying parts of the grant process for the state level. That's my only comment.
Additional comments? Go ahead.
You were waving over there, weren't you? Sorry. Yeah, their potholes don't get fixed the way they do in other neighborhoods. So you might want to just include poor maintenance, but maybe we're better than that, I'm not sure. Another thing that bothered me, and this is not, you were referring to the ATP. And, okay, that's where you get our money, and we don't set their rules, and maybe we need to, contact our congressman. But with the advent of the e-bikes, poor people are riding e-bikes a lot. And setting up safe roads for a 20 to, maybe even a 28 mile per hour vehicle is totally different from, I'm now a happy 10 mile per hour user of a bike lane, and bike lanes are great for that. And I see people whipping down bike lanes on their 28 mile per hour e-bike, and I'm just, I used to be a fast cyclist, and I just cringe. And I see you folks doing some of the right things of, if they're going to be faster two-wheeled vehicles on roads that can't keep up with fast cars, maybe you'd better drop the speed limits, and I see you doing those things. So I know you're aware of all this. But it seems like we really need to work at making this street safe for faster two-wheeled vehicles, which are just inherently not safe. But, it's like, yeah, there needs, I don't even know how to put it in the chapter, but it seems like we're kind of starting out with our hands tied behind our backs on that one.
Committee Member Smith, from the first point that you talked about for the collision data, we're not that granular on the collision data to have every single data point. So if there is a collision documented in a underserved area, doesn't necessarily mean that it's our underserved population. We don't have enough of that data. All we have is where the collisions happen to be overlaid in the underserved areas. So I'm not really sure how to articulate that in the chapter, other than to really talk about just broadly of what, and that's why we went more broadly of what typically in the United States that it's seen, and then there were some local specific sources too in the LA area where they had some studies. But anyway, thank you. We'll have to think about that a little bit more. And then I'll pause on the e-bike comments. I think probably a little bit better on when we go to the policy section.
Just to piggyback off that, I think Committee Member Smith raises a very good point, though, about the cost and accessibility of e-bikes, and increasingly so. And when I think about equity in transportation, I think that is maybe the primary, most relevant thing to local government is ease of access to different modes, and it's primarily financial. You have some people who can't afford to drive, and some people who can't afford not to drive, and they live in, different parts of town, more or less. And I think, having some of that discussion in this, just so we know, kind of put it on paper, this is a city that we all kind of know we live in, but I think that would be pretty helpful. And committee member Blackerby can correct me about this, but I read recently, like, I think it's 10% of the South County population is using MTD 5 days a week to commute, right? So I think that's another huge, like, population of folks that have a lot of equity considerations, from where the bus stops are, and I know we partner with them very well, and transit signal priority. So not to give you a bunch of homework of adding paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, but I think all that stuff would be useful in this chapter.
Great. Additional comments? No? I think my only comment, I liked in this chapter, I did really like the summary of all the different screens. I thought and the different maps, and you could, over the course of the map, start to see where some of the areas were getting kind of tagged each time, or kind of as one-offs. I did feel kind of at the end, because you go through each of these metrics, I almost wanted, once you get kind of down to the EJ community stratified, or the equity considerations moving forward, maybe just it needed a little, like, oomph, or like and therefore this is our approach. Okay. I think you kind of, when you start to get to that, you get into this, figure 11 displays the community stratified by 5% intervals, quantile method with the high impact network overlay, and that's just not the most straightforward layman's language for this is how we kind of consolidate all of this information. So yeah, I'd kind of like to see maybe the last couple paragraphs say maybe a little bit of a commitment to the choice that the city has made. All right. And yeah, I think we can go on to our next section.
Great.
I think this is our last one before we go to a public comment and then a short break. Okay.
I already can't thank the committee enough just for your feedback so far. It's so helpful. Really appreciate it. All right, let's go into safe routes to school. So this was not a grant requirement, but we felt it was important to include an update because the last update we had was with the pedestrian master plan of 2006. And when we went back through it, it's a lot of the narrative is now outdated. A lot of the policies were good, but we felt like it needed to be modernized. And so what we did, we worked with Move Santa Barbara County. They've been tracking all the current travel patterns for each of the schools as part of the Safe Routes to School contract. So I wanted to include that, the list of schools. What we struggle with, we know the schools that are within the city limits, but we also felt it was important to add schools that are outside of the city limits, but have that use city streets to get to the school. And so I think I forgot to add San Marcos in there, so we will be adding that in there. Vieja Valley is another example of a school that there's a lot of the families live in the city limits, but commute to Vieja Valley. That's unincorporated. So we also wanted to put in context for the high injury network and what are the youth involved collisions. And I'll go over some of those charts. What we know as the infrastructure needs. And basically it's a lot of the stuff, but in the context of school boundaries. So spatially, we're looking at it from that lens. And then what we're currently working on right now that would benefit various schools. And then we have the updated Safe Routes to School education program. When it was written in 2006, it was Coast was our education provider, and it's still sort of Coast, but Coast was renamed and merged with the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition to make up Move Santa Barbara County. So we have that information there. We wanted updated policies for education, and then about the school crossing guard program. So what I do want to say is that we are also, at the same time, are sharing with Move Santa Barbara County. We want to get their feedback too on this. And then we've also shared with the district superintendents as well to get additional feedback, specifically when it relates to some of the policies. We were aggressive on a couple of the policies, and one of them being that is safety education, traffic safety education should be mandatory. And so that will be a discussion with the superintendents because we have common goals. We want people to get from point A to point B safely. They want their students and families to get to school safely. So we are aligned, and I'm hoping that that could come to fruition. So that's some additional check-in that we need to have. And really, it goes beyond the city. Right now, this document only covers the city of Santa Barbara, but we're part of regional boards. Move Santa Barbara County provides safe routes to school education across the entire county, includes North County and South County schools. So we do feel strongly that everybody should be receiving the same education, and it shouldn't be up to a school whether to decline the education or not. So so that's what's in there. As far as, I'll share a few of the graphs. Again, it just the one on the left has the high entry network with the elementary school boundaries, one with the junior high. A lot of these graphs are just kind of, it's just, I think, for informational purposes of what does that look like. And then the youth-involved collisions were very interesting, and really a lot of them are tied to our high injury network. So the one on the left is the vehicle versus pedestrian collision. And we also went back through the data just to make sure, like, are all the pedestrians the youth, or is there pedestrian drivers that had had a collision with a pedestrian. So we did go through that. Most of it is where vehicles are hitting youth pedestrians, but in one case it was a youth driver hitting an adult pedestrian. So the one on the right is vehicle versus vehicle collisions, and at least one of the drivers is a youth. And when I say youth, that is 17 and under. Well, in this case, if you're driving 17, 16, or probably 15 if you have your 15 and a half with your permit, yes. And then the last one is and that's where there's more collisions of vehicle versus bicycle. So there are two of those collisions on there that it's youth drivers hitting adult cyclists. So from there,
All right, and we'll go to Committee Member Blackerby with a question.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe this is sort of a question more for Move, but on the current travel patterns for all the different schools, just when you glance at it, you're like, okay, some of these have been asked these questions have been surveyed every year for the last 10 years or whatever. And some of them, like Roosevelt, there's data for 2014-15 and 23-24. Some of them haven't had it for a while. I know that there's like different engagement, but I guess, one, I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to that. And then two, if there's a way for, sort of the city directly or in hand with Move to go to the school district and go, hey, can you help us out? It just seems like it's school site by school site based. And so I'm just curious because this is really important information, and you would think too the schools would want to know it. So I'm just curious if you have any sort of insight as to why that is that way.
Yes, we do have some insight. For that particular school, that has been one school routinely, over time, has declined the safe routes to school education.
Roosevelt? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so that's why we have not, I think, has not done the tallies because it hasn't been a focus of the school. But I don't want to there's always different regime changes, and it's really different from principal to principal. And just having a parent of school-aged children too, it's overwhelming, and I'm sure just for the regular curriculum and all the metrics you have to have for the school and events and everything like that, I think is overwhelming. But again, it's like we do have a traffic safety collision issue. In this chapter, you see that youth are involved in those collisions, and so again, it's our hope that it's embedded in every school to get those tallies. And it really kind of differs from year to year. And then there's also what we're monitoring with Move Santa Barbara County. Is it a operational thing on their end? Because they are providing education through the entire county. Is it staffing level issues where we can't get these tallies? So that's what we're on the year-to-year contracts trying to be up to date as much as feasible.
Yeah, and then I would say it's something to, I guess this is kind of a comment, but to have a direct, once this product is created, or maybe even before, to like actually send it directly to the school district and the school sites and go, heads up, like this is, this is happening at your school. Obviously, they don't control the roadways or whatever, but I just think that direct engagement, I know way in the past, the city councils had a joint meeting with the school board or whatever, but that kind of thing is, I think something that families probably aren't aware of, and probably even principals aren't aware of, or, other folks. So I just think it's something that would be good to have that, even that direct connection. Move's doing their good work and all that stuff, and they've got like certain contacts at the schools, but when it's like, hey, policymakers, heads up, like this is what's happening around your school sites, I think that would have an impact.
Any additional questions? Go ahead.
First, thank you for including the equity and safe routes to school in the plan, even though it's not a funding requirement. I think that is the right thing to do. So congratulations and thanks. My comments are, in the discussion of infrastructure needs, there is implied but not clearly stated that the installation of sidewalks in and around the schools is not possible. So perhaps you could identify where it is possible and include that, in the narrative. Second item is Move, and prior to Move Coast, has been conducting mobility surveys for like a decade or more. It might be nice to do a comparative at what schools have things gone the wrong direction as far as mobility, and use that as an enhanced criteria for fixing that particular issue. The bike maps indicate bike lane classifications without an explanation and clarifying what they really are. There are a lot of people don't know what a difference between class 1, class 2, and as it goes before council, it might be nice for there to be a clear discussion of the different types of bike lanes and what degree of safety they can provide. Lastly, the community engagement survey, and we discussed this last time and the time before that. 3.5% response rate is not a valid survey. And I would think you could save a lot of paper and ink by merely condensing that into a, this is what we think, and from what we have gathered, and not have it appear as it's so cut and dry, because clearly it is not. 311 responses out of 8,000 students does not a plan make. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Go ahead.
I believe the last meeting we talked extensively about bicycles too, and I just want to comment that this whole thing is such a moving target. The state may develop new laws about people who are riding electric bicycles, and maybe even have like a permit to ride it and be different than a motorcycle. I know that's all kind of floating out there. And the school programs are for bikes that are not motorized. To the best of my knowledge, the kids get trained on regular bicycles, not motorized bicycles. And yet, the 12-year-olds are all going 30 miles an hour down State Street. So I think your programs can't be based on the past, and yet you can't predict the future. Exactly. But we have to be aware that more and more young people are going to be on these more dangerous bicycles, and they need to be trained how to ride them, and they need to, I think, have some sort of permit situation, probably at the state. And we need to be able to enforce and ticket these kids possibly. So that's just, I just think it's important to be aware, to think about it that way, that we're moving into a whole different world of motorized transportation. And we can't just talk about, 8-year-olds riding to bike and to school and how nice that would be. That would be really nice. And I would like to comment that I really, really like these charts, even though all the schools haven't participated. I think for me, I've been on this committee a very long time. It's the first time I've really looked at these, and they're incredibly useful. And what you in the audience are looking at is that most of the schools, a huge number of kids come to school in a family vehicle, and very few are biking. And it would really be cool to study those, and the few schools that have a few kids biking, maybe work with those schools and say, how did you make that happen? And have other people work on that. But anyway, that's my comments. Thanks.
All right, we can finish up committee comments.
Yeah, just a few comments. Yeah, I think a lot of very valid points have been made already. I couldn't agree more about ideally having requirements for all educational institutions, probably like, especially in high school with driver's ed. I can't believe that we didn't have driver's ed as a mandatory or even optional thing at my high school in San Marcos when you have student parking, right, taking up half the campus. It just feels like, I think it's the #1 cause of death for minors in America is traffic violence, and you would think that that would be a major priority to educate around. And yeah, so anything we can do with this plan or as a city to push for that, I'm strongly in support of. I think something I mentioned before is, there's a little bit of discussion with the maps in the attendance areas, but I think just kind of like pinpointing like the barriers, physical barriers that prevent people from walking or biking to the school in their attendance area is important. Like Adams and VA Valley are a good example. Like it's a lot easier to get from Hidden Valley to VA Valley than it is to get to Adams in a very comfortable way because you don't have to cross the freeway and you can take a separated, beautiful bike path that people spend millions of dollars on. And yet, you have to drive your kids over there. I think, let's see here. I think the sidewalk infill, I don't know if it was in this section, I believe it was, but there was a map of the missing sidewalks. And I think, some parts like deep in the mountains might not be as feasible, but, if there's pretty clear gaps, there's quite a few in San Roque that surprised me. I think prioritizing filling those in would be pretty key. And I agree about the point about the bike lane classifications. I think SBCAG is either just put out or working on with folks a bike comfort map, which in my opinion is much more digestible. I still couldn't tell you by memory the classifications of each lane because they go up and down in terms of what I consider comfortable. And yeah, I agree with Committee Member Rodriguez. The e-bike is here; it's not going away. Personally, I think on net, very positive development. I would have killed for one of those, like in my childhood up in the Riviera, so I could actually get around town a lot faster. But yeah, there are a lot of issues. I mean, I've seen them myself too. So whatever we can do to educate and also physically separate folks from traffic, the better. And then Committee Member Blackerby made a very interesting point about the data we have here. I would have loved to seen aggregate numbers of all of them put together. I understand that might be hard if some are missing different years, but to the extent that's mathematically possible, I think it would be interesting to see if there's consistent trends, because I was surprised, the walking went way down, some it went way up. Not really asking you to explain that for each school, but I think just getting a broad citywide picture would be helpful in terms of how trends are changing. Yeah, thank you for all this data. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, I did want to mention just with for the bike infrastructure and then naming the class 1, class 2, and we have a whole story map on our website for that. But yes, do people remember? No, it doesn't make sense for every resident. No, and so yes, we are regionally going to be changing that to comfort. I'd like to kind of describe it as if you're skiing or snowboarding, yes, where are the green routes, the easy routes, and then what the double black diamonds, although a little bit not apples to apples because sometimes you crave the double black diamonds. But on a cycling, you do want to know the green routes, especially for the school to really understand that. So that is in development. I'm part of the review committees for that. And we, when we set up our latest bike story mapping and the way that we did it, it can easily be translated to a comfort map later on. So, but we have just what we have right now on it, and we don't want to delay this important safety effort for the naming. So, but I can easily explain that. And we can, I think, explain too, it's just, yes, schools that are in the grid, as you know, are much easier to walk and bike. Once you divert from the grid, then that's when it's very difficult and you have more vehicle driven the higher ratios of the vehicles are parents taking their kids to school via vehicle. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry. All right.
I think as for my own comments, just really briefly, I would just agree. I really like the way the missing sidewalks and bike pathways are displayed on this. In my other life, I'm actually currently preparing a presentation on biking at UCSB and comparing our students versus staff and faculty, and I open it with just a map, and this is where the students live, and this is where the staff and faculty live, and if you look at students, they're right next to campus, everything is flat, there's no roads or freeways to cross, versus staff live, here, here, and here. Here's where the freeway runs, here's the gap in the bike path that is, getting built now. But, so I think it's important to, have these maps to show that at some point you can't just, you can only do so much training about how to bike or walk or how to get to a school when there's no bike path or sidewalk to get there. So I just think that was a very useful way to frame this. All right, I think we are now going to public comment. Okay, we'll open for public comment for anyone who would like to speak on any of the items or material we've gone over so far. I think up to 2 minutes per speaker. And then we will have a short break, and then we will continue with the rest of our items and have an additional public comment after that. So, do we have any speakers?
Yes, we just have one, Barry Remis.
Okay, good evening, Chair Cieslag and committee members. My name is Barry Remis, and I am with Move Santa Barbara County, the amalgamation of the former Coast and Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, and we also, yes, do coordinate the Safe Routes to School program in the region and countywide. So we empower, educate, and advocate for people who walk, bike, and take public transit. So a lot to recap in 2 minutes. So just first of all, do want to place emphasis on the really great reasoning behind including the equity component into the plan. And we are fans of the term underserved versus disadvantaged, so just maybe keep that in mind. I think just a little bit more equitable. And when it comes to the Safe Routes to School chapter, MOVE will be definitely engaging with the city staff and Jessica and her team to review and refresh the Safe Routes to School chapter, because clearly, yes, the 2006 Pedestrian Master Plan has some old, outdated information. Mobility counts and traffic patterns, or I guess I should say transportation counts. MOVE has been doing it for quite some time, and more these days it becomes even more challenging to be able to really engage and get fully comprehensive mobility counting, and that is basically where a classroom teacher is tallying and asking by a show of hands, okay, who biked to school today, who walked, who came in a family vehicle, or who carpooled maybe, or took the school bus, et cetera, so that we can really quantify those counts. And it really does roller coaster throughout the years, pre-COVID and post-COVID, and also in the environment that we're in today. A myriad factors that can affect parents' decisions for whether they are or not going to allow their students and whether they feel it's safe for their students to walk or bike to school. But that's why our education team is not just educators, but education and encouragement coordinators, because we're not only out there teaching children pedestrian and bike safety, but we're also engaging with families and schools to be able to encourage more biking, and also identifying through surveying the barriers of why it's not happening as much. And while we are delighted to say that the Santa Maria Bonita School District up in Santa Maria has fully adopted our bike education curriculum district-wide, we are in discussions with the Santa Barbara Unified School District to be able to hopefully achieve that goal as well, as Ms. Grant alluded to. And so we look forward to the discussions and reviewing further the Safe Routes to School chapter. And also we're excited to be partnering with the Santa Barbara Police Department with multiple Office of Traffic Safety grant work in the future, as we do with other communities. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. And do we have any other speakers?
We have no other speakers.
All right, I believe we will take a short break. It is 6:43 now. We're doing pretty good. So we will start back, we'll say it, 6:49. our committee back at the table, so I will reconvene. And we will move on to section 7, which is our policy section.
Yes. So for this one, for the grant requirements, they did want to include current policies, and then basically from those current policies, what would be the updated policies or process improvements? Really, again, with the vision of getting you to 0 fatalities and severe injuries. So we initially started to map out all the existing policies. There was quite a bit, and so we ended up putting the current policies in an appendix for context. And because we thought we would lose the reader with all of some of the existing policies, and we felt like let's just go right out and what we want to do now at this point moving forward. So we have kind of the guiding policy section, and then broken up into the themes of education, engineering, enforcement, and post-crash care policies. And just as for a refresher too, the post-crash care policies, that's essentially when we did cover this in the collision, I think, analysis or past and present approach, but it's essentially that when you look at the federal government guidelines on that, is that you're not causing a secondary collision when emergency officials are at the initial collision, that the roadway is being protected, so you're not having an additional domino effect for that. And so anyway, as far as for a guide of in this particular, we looked at San Luis Obispo was probably our most favorite one. So we took a lot of policies from San Luis Obispo for a framework. Again, there's kind of using as a guide, but then obviously making it Santa Barbara specific. But because our cities are very similar, and a lot of the infrastructure improvements that we're both installing in our cities is as far as for like information trading and certain things we're working on or observing are very similar as well. So that's a little bit of context for that particular chapter. And again, for the policies for the education, we're working, actually we're just reviewing drafts today for the Vision Zero education campaign and kind of the pet peeve messaging. That's something that when we had our workshops recently to get feedback, like what are everybody's sort of top messages that you want to do. We think they're all important, but like if we had to start to send them out to the community, sort of what rises to the importance for that. So we're working on that. And of course, the Safe Routes to School related education, and a lot of what the engineering, again, ties to the funding and making that a priority. And then thank you, Committee Member Bakke, about can there be local designated funding too? I do know that San Luis Obispo did have a local funding designation for that, so I'll look a little bit more on some other language. And then we had some additional enforcement, and in the audience, we have Commander Payne. He's been extremely wonderful in reviewing a lot of the documents, and we're working with in connection with the police chief as well on some of the enforcement language too. So we really appreciated his feedback and eyes on that. And at the end of the day, I think for us, you don't want to have so many policies or that it just becomes like, how do we even do this? Like, no, like that staff shuts down and we can't do this. So we did try to write it in a way where we felt like this is something that we could accomplish and follow. But with that, we'll lead it to questions and comments. If you do feel like, is it do they feel that they read well to you? Are they kind of, in your opinion, attainable? That type of thing, and if are we missing the boat on anything else?
All right, do we have questions from the committee? Blackerby?
So, as I was reading the existing traffic safety policies, and looking at the Vision Zero ones, obviously, I was here when we adopted these, but I didn't like commit every single one to memory, but some of the ones, I mean, the most interesting part to me was the ones that were to be added, right? And so, you know, these are adopted. The thing that sort of stood out to me is, especially in the add section, is like, are we doing that? Are we doing these things? Some of the things that I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's happening. So I guess one of my questions is like, are these things happening? Like, it's one thing to say, these are existing policies, but if those aren't happening, the things that we thought should happen in our Vision Zero plan, like maybe pulling those out as like, hey, we really meant it. Like, let's focus on that. But I'm just curious if you feel like those are being achieved, as far as like the policies and processes. I just feel like some of them, if they are happening, it's quite hidden and it should be talked about more, I guess. So, I don't know, I'm just curious if you feel like these are being done, especially in the ones that were gonna be sort of added, if you feel that way, and if not, then is there a way to kind of bring those more into what we're suggesting should be policy and process changes as part of this plan?
I think the short answer is yes and no.
Okay.
I think for us, and again, it takes a while to move the needle, and as you know, like when we look at our collision patterns, and when we install like infrastructure, for example, and you don't look at just a year collision pattern individually. You kind of have to put it in context to 5 years. But say in year 4 is when the infrastructure improvement went in, and then you're still doing the 5-year increment reporting, so it's still showing up as not safe, and it takes like 5 years from that particular infrastructure. Well, all the infrastructure, because of funding constraints, all come in at different times, and so for us, like, we're scratching the surface, and what we're seeing, like in that past and present approach to traffic safety chapter, what we are seeing in the infrastructure, again, there hasn't been enough years, but for the infrastructure improvements we're seeing is very promising. So I do think that that's working. I think from the enforcement perspective, it's we're not absence of enforcement. There is enforcement going on. I think where we get the frustrating is a lot of collisions don't necessarily have engineering solutions, and they're behavioral. And that comes to play with education and enforcement. And you usually want, before you go to enforcement's typically your last resort, you want to be on the proactive end of education. And so I think we're of the opinion that the behaviors haven't changed.
Yeah.
And so I think with that in mind, that's where you see some of the updated policy language to see if we could add more emphasis in the different categories. Does that help?
It does. I think just some of the things that I'll bring it up in comments, but thank you.
All right, any questions before we go to comments?
Two things. First thing is, it's discussed in the action policies that there should be targeted enforcement, high visibility enforcement. So my question would be, is it within the purview of this process, and it also says identify funding sources and stuff, is it within the purview of this process to try to find funds for the city to fund the police department to have a traffic enforcement division? Or is that a different process?
I think I'll try to answer it, and Commander Plain, please fill it in. So we do have a traffic safety enforcement section, and it's a blend of officers and then parking enforcement, because parking enforcement is also plays into traffic safety. So for example, we don't want somebody parking on an access ramp or on the sidewalk or in the red zone. So that plays into it. I think again, it just, and I know the police department's working on a larger strategic plan, and traffic safety is just one element to overall community safety topics. And so there is supplemental funding. There is like the Office of Traffic and Safety that we have targeted certain enforcement over the years related for safety, particularly for safety of pedestrians and cyclists. And then we also have I think Mr. Remis of MOVE alluded to, there's a related Office and Traffic Safety grant that's almost about to kick off, but it targeted for the junior high age for both the police department and MOVE to team up at junior highs for the e-bike education. So that part's exciting. Commander Payne, is there anything else you'd like to add as it relates to traffic safety?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Commander Chris Payne with Santa Barbara Police Department. I am the Field Operations Division Commander, which encompasses our traffic unit. So we do, in fact, have a traffic unit, which is typically the officers that you see on the motorcycles. That is our main traffic enforcement detail. And as part of that, we also do have a dedicated DUI enforcement car that works Wednesday through Saturday night. So in addition to what Ms. Grant was speaking to, we do have the parking enforcement as well, which encompasses 12 full-time parking enforcement officers. Right now, that particular unit is fully staffed. As you can imagine, the police department has not reached full staff. And so the chief of police has had the ability to add to the traffic unit. And to Ms. Grant's point, the Office of Traffic Safety grant is another tool that we utilize to try and increase our enforcement. It provides overtime funding for officers to go out and do very specific directed enforcement. And right now, the focus on that enforcement is primarily speed, with the exception of certain grants. Funding does require other enforcement, such as distracted driving, DUI, pedestrian bicycle enforcement. So we do use that funding as well. And then again, education is another component that we're involved in. We actually shifted some of our OTS grant funding this year from enforcement to education. And that was with the grant that we're working with Move Santa Barbara County on. And that is to try and increase education about e-bike safety and rider safety. In addition to that, one of the other educational components that we are currently working on, it's not 100% finished, but we're working with the school district to try and create what we would call a bike rodeo. So as opposed to just providing informational education, this would actually be hands-on education. We have a couple of officers that have attended what we call POST, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training. That's the state entity that guides law enforcement training. So they've been to a certified class to actually provide this instruction to our youth. We're trying to partner with the school district at this point in time to use their facilities, be able to go to the students, and we can host, each class is about 2 hours. It would also, we're working with Cottage Hospital to set up a booth, Move Santa Barbara County to set up a booth so they can meet some of their grant requirements. To try and really increase the education of some of our younger riders. So that's the bulk of it. Did that bring up any questions?
All right. Any
Thank you.
additional questions?
I do have other questions on other parts of this chapter, which just on the outset, Love this chapter, my favorite chapter. No surprise.
Oh, Committee Member Baki, before we get into, is there any more questions for Commander Payne? Because he does have another obligation before he leaves.
I don't think so, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for coming. It's really appreciated.
Of course. Anybody has future questions, Ms. Grant has my contact info, feel free to shoot me an email.
Yeah, so my questions are kind of all over the place, so apologies in advance. But on the complete streets thing that we talked about earlier, which I love, would the city be reevaluating designs or plans currently in the process for restriping and repaving projects if this goes to council, in the next few months? For adoption, does that trigger a reassessment of things that are currently in the pipeline to double check that we are incorporating complete street principles into the next roads to be repaved?
Great question. I think it would be from this point moving forward because at least for the larger projects, we are in a final design stage. But again, we do think it's through the lens of complete streets for all the other ones that we've had lots of hearings about. But I know that, Milpas is one of the cases. And I think that when there's an infrastructure improvement, there's can always be part twos to that. Like sometimes it can't always be. It's multi-stage. So I think in this planning effort, the concerns that have been brought up in the recent hearings can be addressed in the strategies and priority project selections.
Gotcha. Well, you read my mind. I was thinking about Milkas, and I won't go into it again. I just think it would be great to have at least pilot project similar to what Glida had, to see how it works out, but leave that there. Another question I had about the existing policies, specifically the ones that jumped out to me were the bicycle master plan ones about the measurements of success. So one is reducing collision rates by 25% from 2012 to 2020. I tried to check this. It seems like it's kind of a mixed bag that we succeeded in the overall collisions, however, failed to reach that target amongst serious and fatal collisions. So I guess the question is, should we incorporate maybe it's more of a comment. I just think maybe we should incorporate explanations about how we're doing, kind of what Committee Member Blackerby was saying, on some of the existing ones. But the question I do have is on the second measurement of success, which is to create at least 2 new funding sources for multimodal safety improvements in the next 5 years. And I guess this is from 2012. So I know Measure C was passed in 2017, so I think we can count that as one of them, although there's no dedicated piece for it, multimodal. But I guess the question is there another multimodal funding source that we've created since 2012?
No, for local.
Yeah.
No, other than Measure A is the only local.
Right.
But that is funding smaller scale projects. There's caps of roughly around, it depends each year, but about the $500,000 mark.
Okay, gotcha.
So, and a lot of the infrastructure improvements that you'll eventually see coming next month are multi-million-dollar recommendations. So that would not be the source other than maybe leveraging Measure A funds for planning efforts associated with those projects. And I think with the bicycle master plan too, at the time when it was written, not that their e-bikes have existed, but really the explosion of e-bikes really hit our city kind of right around the 2019 pandemic, a little bit before the pandemic, and then kind of then exploded to the point where there's, half of our network is e-bikes now. And so as far as like collisions, yeah, and that's what we noticed where there's been a decrease in the acoustic bikes collisions, but there's definitely been a big drastic increase in collisions for e-bikes, and so that's something too that we can relook at if there's anything e-bike specific, because that is new. That would be new since the bicycle master plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. And the last question I have, and this is, I hope not too specific, but I did have a friend share with me that they asked to, and so this speaks to specifically within here the emergency vehicle planning. You know, the response times and making sure that, I think there's language in here about balancing the public safety need of lowering transportation injuries in those projects, and making sure we're balancing that with emergency vehicle. And I know it's gotten brought up on a lot of the high profile projects over the years. So I had a friend share with me that on SB Connect, they were asking for speed bumps on San Remo, and I'm not sure I'd support that necessarily either, but the response they got was that unfortunately we don't have anything to offer, as the city doesn't currently have a traffic calming program, and the use of speed reduction features won't be expanded due to their impact on emergency response times. I sort of a combo comment question is like, is that actually quite the policy? I understand maybe speed bumps specifically is a policy that I'm not aware of, but I know we hit like traffic calming is a pretty broad term. And we're talking about a lot of traffic calming projects that we are working on. So I guess the comment is, I think, clarity on expectations for folks of when that trigger is hit, that there's a concern that overrides an engineering solution. Anyway, I threw something at you if you want to chime in.
Yes, I'm happy to. That is sort of a stock comment that the members of the public will receive about speed humps, bumps, tables. We do not have a traffic calming program. This will lead me into one of the other discussion topics that we'll talk about for the traffic safety countermeasures. I think that's going to kind of be our guiding document as far as engineering solutions. Generally speaking, the speed humps that do exist in our city, some of them have just been locations sort of, I don't know, grandfathered, if that's the right word. And we've had some come in with our bicycle boulevards on Gillespie and Aliso streets to, again, make it a comfortable roadway, because those are essentially class shared with vehicles. And so we're very deliberate on locations for those. But as far as a mass of speed humps, the reality for that would not be coming in, especially on routes where there's emergency access routes. But this is what we struggle with, like kind of higher level, is we still, emergency access is very, very important. But like from a lens for some of the traffic collisions, we're like, well, if we put in the right infrastructure improvements, then emergencies wouldn't be having to arrive no longer at this intersection. So, but it's not completely that simple. I think that's kind of the frustrations, and with that we work with police and fire on our designs. And so that's kind of like our argument to them sometimes when we're trying to cite the best safety for a particular their corridor. But there's a lot of emergency calls that, you want to get to patient, victim, whatever, ASAP, and what does that look like? And there's like a balance for that, like from an emergency access standpoint, you want a freeway with no impediments. But if you designed our system as a freeway, then it wouldn't be complete streets, and it would completely be a high-stress city. So that's the certain things that we have to balance.
Yeah. That's a very fair answer. Thank you so much.
All right, any questions and comments? Any additional comments? We'll go to committee member Smith first and then to Blackerby.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the e-bike thing. You were saying this would be the place, and I guess to put it a little more directly, we always talk about separation, but if the speed limit is 25 or 30 for cars and a bike is going 20 or 25, that bike shouldn't be in a bike lane right next to parked cars, for instance. And so you need to plan for, these e-bikes to be in traffic with, kids on them. They're not very visible. And it kind of puts a whole different stress on road design, in my opinion. I'm just going to add, like, decades ago, there was a guy named John Forrester who wrote a book about bike safety, and it was very controversial, but he just, advocated, be a vehicle. You're a vehicle, get out there. And as somebody who, like I said, I used to be able to ride fast, and yeah, I would ride in Boston in rush hour traffic and go through the roundabouts, and it's like I was in the cars. That's what I would do. And you kind of have to do that if you're on a 25 mile per hour vehicle. But, it's not consistent with Vision Zero. It is just kind of intrinsically dangerous, but it becomes really challenging to make streets, you can get thrown off with a bike much more easily, and you're much more vulnerable. And it just seemed like there should be material on what you're going to do about that, but I'm not going to tell you what that should be because it's hard. So.
I'll have to link the committee. There was a really good, I think it was almost 2 hours about the John Forrester and how it was not just bikes. That's the channel on YouTube. I urge you all to listen to it in the way explaining why, kind of to the detriment of why our bike systems look the way they do in the United States versus Europe. It's fascinating, but you're absolutely correct on just when we think of road design, and I think that's where there's lots of friction between e-bike cyclists and drivers is because e-bikes have erased the hills. So where you would typically see kind of our biking population, because if you're on an acoustic bike, you typically choose the routes that have the least topography. Again, if you're not on a rec ride, this is just your regular commuting type of utilitarian type of riding. And so now, because e-bikes can essentially go the speed of traffic, you see that basically, and they're legally allowed on our roadway network. And what does that look like? I don't have the answer tonight, but that's something that we continually do when we're thinking of our designs for sure. But yeah, I'll have to I'll put a pin on that as well. Yes.
Blackerby next, and then we'll go to Rodriguez.
I'm glad that one of the sort of updated enforcement policies, or there's a section about interdepartmental coordination, public works and planning, or in public works comprised of engineering and planning, meeting with SPPD quarterly, and having ongoing collaboration. I see that as the biggest gap since we've, just from the outside looking in, since Vision Zero has been adopted. And when I look, like I was saying, when I look at these adopted safety goals and policies in Vision Zero, I just see a bunch that I'm like, if this is happening, it's like the best kept secret in town, right? There's no annual reporting TCC and City Council, right? from police department. I think the here and there's sort of enforcement actions we've seen over the years where it's like, hey, don't blow through a crosswalk or whatever, right? And that's sort of publicized. And I know they've been understaffed and all that, but it's, I think there's all the, used to be 3 E's, now it's like 5 or 7 or whatever, but there's a lot of E's involved. I have total confidence in the fact that engineering is being done, whether it's put in or it's been designed, it's applied for, it's coming soon, it's already there, whatever. I have total confidence. Education, I have confidence in. You can never do enough education, but I know a lot of it's already being done. But that enforcement piece and the collaboration, I think, is the sort of the need to close the loop in this like safe systems approach. There's the tracking of like, okay, well, we know what happened, but all of that, I think some of it just falls flat if there's not buy-in of trying to solve this problem. And I think that's the thing. It's like the thing we're trying to solve here is fatal and serious collision or injuries. Like, and that's something, I'm sure the police department's invested in that, but is there a specific concerted set of actions working with the people who are in charge of the roadways? Like, and I just haven't seen that. So I think that, like the citation report data sheet to the public, following quarterly reports, that kind of thing, like, I think that's really powerful. And when I've seen things in the past, especially when I used to work for the state, CHP would put out stuff after every like sort of holiday campaign, the Avoid the 12 thing, where it's like, this is how many people we pulled over. This is how many people were under the influence of whatever. And one of the most important and effective aspects of that was, and this is where they're from. Because people would go, a lot of this happened like in San Ynez Valley, where they're like, oh, it's these out-of-towners, it's people coming into the casino, it's whatever. And it was like, no, dude, 95% are your neighbors. And I think that was like a really important thing for people to realize, like, oh, oops, it's us, right? And that's something that if shifting behavior, if like enforcement, okay, if you get pulled over because you're doing something wrong, you might change your behavior, but people knowing about it, like social pressure of like, oh man, they're gonna get me, right? If I don't straighten up, I think is really important. And to see like, if we're all taking responsibility as community members, no matter what mode we're using, and a lot of us use multiple, like, I think that's gonna be a huge part of it. So I just hope that buy-in is there, and I hope, even if it's maybe not there from the department, that then the city administrator and the council are like, no, really, you have to work together and you have to focus on this. Because I think that's kind of been the missing piece that I've seen, that it's not been realized to the fullest potential as to what we kind of had in mind in Vision Zero. So I think this gives you like another chance to move forward in a positive direction to focus on all those things.
Committee Member Rodriguez next.
I was interested in what you mentioned about there's something we could watch about the bicycle safety. Where is it? YouTube or?
Yes, I'll have NAMI send it out to you all.
Yeah, I'd appreciate
It's
that.
it's really informational. This just for background, this particular channel, he can be a little dry humor or sarcastic in a way, but he does, he makes it entertaining and kind of funny, but then kind of it breaks down, why we ended up with some of the issues. So there was, a lot of it was just briefly, is more geared for, in the earlier instruction books to road cyclists that really just wanted freeways themselves for the biking network. And so it really didn't recognize cyclists of all ages and abilities. And so it was actually a lot of the early bicycle coalitions were against traffic calming because it would slow them down. And so there was a lot of decisions made for a lot of our very important regions and areas that you'll recognize us when they go over it, that we could have been designing really nice sort of European networks and how this was such a impediment. So it's really fascinating. Hmm. And it's also from the e-bike perspective too. It's really fascinating too. As we're constantly researching and going to as much trainings as possible, but Europe regulations for e-bikes is so different from United States regulations, and the power and speed is so much higher than what's allowed in Europe, and so Europe's really not experiencing the same level as we are, because a lot of the bikes are speed governed at, I think, right around, I want to say 15, 17 miles per hour. I need to fact check that, but so I think that's really interesting. So that will, I think, continue to be monitored. Like, again, our little plan's not gonna make a worldwide change, but it's something that we'll monitor, and hopefully over the years with different legislations, there's more attention to that.
All right. Additional comments on? Go ahead.
Yeah. As I was reading this, I just made bullet points, so forgive me, and no need to respond to all of them, maybe just whatever you think is most interesting. Yeah, I'm all for additional education and enforcement. I just think, as we've mentioned in previous meetings, let's make sure that that's responsive to what the data is telling us of who is at fault, who, it still is the case that the vast majority of incidents are drivers are at fault and involved, and I'm a driver too. I'm not trying to demonize people in cars or anything, but even amongst the bicycle incidents, they are still the majority of at fault in the most recent year of the ones that we know. So it's I don't want to, I feel like I'm wary of the education enforcement stuff getting over e-bike education and blaming the rider, and there definitely are a lot of, especially on the younger side, folks that need serious education or re-education on how to use their bikes. But I just want to put that out there. Same thing with DUIs. It's a colossal problem in this town, but I think in the language here, there's not a lot of talk about distracted driving, which I also see all the time, all hours of the day. People just right in their face, their phone, and it feels like no one ever gets caught for that. But I have heard of people getting caught for at a stoplight looking at their phone real quick. So I don't know if we have data on the distracted driving in here, but I think that's a big education and enforcement opportunity. Earlier points I made about getting as much of this regularly in front of city council and other decision makers as possible, just to make sure everyone is aware of the scale of the public safety problem that we have. Because for all the language we hear from folks about their commitment to public safety, it is statistically true that the largest public safety threat to most Santa Barbarans is traffic violence. It's just far and away the case. And yet, in terms of funding, as I've mentioned, in terms of who gets airtime, we're just not, I think, matching the scale of the issue. And so I love a lot of the policies that are in here to address it. I love that you're looking at SLO. I think despite their smaller size and fewer resources, they are kind of in another class on some of the active transportation stuff. I think it's 20% of their public works budget or streets budget is going to bicycle projects, earmarked because they want a 20% mode share. And that's just kind of how they followed through with it. So I'm not necessarily advocating for that exactly, but I think some sort of local commitment is pivotal, because the state budget, it's not going to turn back to 2022 overnight when we had all this extra money in the active transportation program, didn't get the money back that it originally was supposed to. So I'm not holding out hope that, especially at the federal level, there's going to be a lot of easy money out there for these projects. If we want to solve these issues, we really need to look locally as well for, even just the cheap and easy stuff. Maybe not like Cliff Drive level, but smaller scale stuff. I think I'm really excited and interested in the emergency vehicle priority signaling stuff, and I think it'd be really cool if we can, take the opportunity with replacing those to also look at the bike, pedestrian, transit signal priority simultaneously as we're making the switches where appropriate. On DUIs, I think there's some stuff in here that I love about not making it harder for people to avoid leaving their car in the garages overnight. Like I have the Weekenders downtown parking pass, and I have like 2 or 3 times left it overnight because then I can get it the next morning for free, right? And it makes it that much easier to do the right thing. I think similarly, it's getting a little bit into land use, but like, why do we require a establishment that exclusively or primarily sells alcohol to have parking? Why is that required in 2026 in Santa Barbara? So maybe a bit out of the scope, but just want to put that out there. And yeah, like I mentioned, I get a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, apprehensive about language. I think it's the last, it's like in the printed version of this, it's the last page, page 8, about like, coordinating with fire department on like efficiency of EMS response, and like that's super important, but like you said, we have to make sure that we are doing what is saving the most lives, period, right? And so if there's a traffic safety intervention that could have a negative impact on response times, it needs to be weighed against the lives that traffic safety intervention is going to save. And it gets callous, like, no, we don't want to be counting lives saved here, lives lost there, and like equating it that way. But I think, I just think it would be helpful if we spell out what are our criteria for, speed bumps, like, very good point. Like, it's kind of hard to mitigate the impact of that on emergency response. But like a road diet, if you did a road diet for a 2-way bike lane, that's enough room to functionally be an emergency vehicle lane. If it's not like physically separated. So yeah, I think that's everything. I think I'm very excited about a lot of this, and I hope that we get some additional funding from local sources as well to implement it. But, yeah, thank you.
All right. Any additional comments? Okay. I'll keep mine brief. I think to Committee Member Blackerby's points, I think there are some places in here that, either I wasn't sure exactly what's being talked about, or yes, it's like, oh, is that happening? And I think some of the wording around, especially in the blue charts in the appendix, wording like conducting effective awareness campaigns. Like, what is that? I would love, I think, and it obviously doesn't have to be for anything, but maybe just throughout like almost like a case study or example or two of like, what does that mean? What's the scale of it? Just to get like a little bit of perspective and grounding about what we're talking about. Similarly, there's some spots where it says things like increase the number of patrol officers on bicycles. Like, where are we at now? Like, are we going from 0 to 2? Are we going from 10 to 20? Just a little more context in a couple spots I think might be helpful. And I think also, I think our next section is transparency, but again, on reporting, I do support Committee Member Blackerby's point on, as much data as we can provide, because we know that 80%, something like 80% of people think they're above average drivers. Shout out to those 20% of people who know their place. But yeah, I think, when we can really show people that and make it clear in reporting that distracted driving, intoxication, just sort of careless driving, careless biking is something that a lot of people are doing without even being aware that they're doing. But yeah, I think we can probably move on to our next section. And I will, well, we have now shot past our 7:30 p.m. planned ending time, and we have 3 sections to go. So we will keep going.
I think that, yes, we'll be very quick. I think the rest of these can be handled quickly. Also, if you didn't feel like you got all your comments to us tonight, please reach out to us in an email to send additional comments. So I don't want to have everybody feel rushed, and I believe I gave a deadline of, I think it was the 2nd or 3rd week of March. So progress and transparency, this one, just a quick, it really comes down to public reporting and then how accessible it is to the public. As far as right now, what we're trying to do is automate a lot of our analysis, kind of taking from Excel's like spreadsheets to GIS to make automatic graphs and charts. Because the reason why there hasn't always been yearly reporting is it takes a while to compile all the data. So that's what we're working on behind the scenes is how much can we automate when we get a new year worth of collision data, and can it automatically, be fed into our framework to spit out charts and graphs instantly. In an ideal world, that the data dashboard's available to the public at a certain point. I think we targeted April because after you don't necessarily get, on January 1st, all of the collision data, there's a delay, and then that takes us a little bit of time for analysis. So I think that's what we set for us of what was a reasonable month to have the data compiled by and then released to the public. Again, trying to not make it onerous. There might be some, I listed kind of what the rubrics were of what we would like to report out on because that's following our safety chapter for the graphics that we have done to date. But if something's too onerous or whatever that's from year to year are not helpful, then we might remove some of that. But ideally, that is the goal that you see outlined in that chapter.
And committee questions?
Just a quick one on the appendice, which I think that's this chapter, right? With the traffic safety countermeasures.
Oh, I'll go through that one
Oh,
next.
you're going to do that next. All right. All good.
Oh, seeing no questions, comments? All right, I think my only comment on this one was, I am all in favor. I would love to see this data dashboard. I do look on the Vision Zero website now and again, and the heat maps that are displayed still end in 2021. I would love to see where we're at. And so I guess I was a little skeptical of how we're going from, not updating for 5 years to we're going to have a dashboard, but I hope it happens. So.
Yes, it exists. We're just trying to get it into a usable format. And I think some of the things we're struggling with is what's it like in the dashboard versus what might be good story mapping. There's 2 different ways in GIS to do that, and that might be a hybrid of both. So that's what we're working on.
Okay, any more comments on, yes, we're on chapter 10, progress and transparency. No? Okay, we will move on to, let's see, this is the Appendix C safety countermeasures.
So this is for Committee Member Bakke. about like having a toolbox for traffic calming. Really what we're seeing for jurisdictions is not necessarily, some jurisdictions do have traffic calming programs, but what we're seeing and kind of uniform amongst the safety action plans of recent are just traffic safety countermeasures toolbox. And so what we gave to you tonight was, I guess I don't have a screenshot of that, but it's a list of all of the ones, of all the kind of top engineering improvements at this particular time. Like, again, from year to year, there's always best management practices that can change, and so we do want this document to, that's one of the policy measures, is to be adaptable over time. So if there's something that comes on, then we need to add that to our countermeasures. And so, again, a lot of these stem from a lot of guiding documents that we already use for our current designs. But kind of in the big part for this is the priority to implement. And what we feel like is this something that should rise to the top? And then where a major street would be anything from basically our arterial streets, anything that's kind of not your slow neighborhood street would be just, we consider the major street, and then residential street just kind of right in neighborhoods proper. So that's essentially, that's the little like cheat sheet for this, but within these graphics, and we didn't have time to finalize all of this, but with every single item, we will have a photo, and most of them are all tied to infrastructure that is in City of Santa Barbara proper. There are some items that are not, that we just don't have that treatment exists, and so we will use stock images for that, but it was really important for us where we're using kind of similar templates that we've seen for other communities use, but I think it's really important to have it in context to our city, because there's so many times when we're designing something, we're like, oh, well, that city does that, we don't do that here, or types of things, and we really want to demonstrate that we actively are putting best management practices in the city. So that will come, I think, in April. Like I said, we're almost there, but there's a lot of, as you see just in the chart, there's a lot of measures that we can use, but we're essentially kind of preview to April as when we bring back the whole entire plan, and really the last remaining chapter is the priority and project selections. And so this is kind of the toolbox that we'll be referencing for the particular corridors, but we will have actually specific treatments called out what we think is most appropriate for a certain corridor or street.
Questions?
Yeah, just a couple. I think I have a sense of maybe why, but like, so bike path is recommended for major streets as a priority to implement, but bike lanes is for residential. So could you just clarify what we're thinking about in terms of that? Like, are we thinking raised, like sidewalk level paths on arterials?
Yes, and this one for the nomenclature is a little bit different. I think it was so, in this one, the bike path, chime in, Derek, if I'm wrong, but this is, yeah, again, this separated from the roadway, and then the bike lanes is just on street, just paint.
That makes sense. Gotcha. And then similar question about the raised crosswalk versus raised intersection. I personally don't really understand what the difference between those would be. Is it just like the raised crosswalk is literally just where the hash marks are and then the middle isn't raised, or?
So the raised crosswalk, one example that we've just recently installed is right next to Harding Elementary on Gillespie,
Okay, right.
where one of the school crossing guards is. That is a raised crosswalk going directly to one of the school entrances. And it also behaves as a kind of speed hump too. And so to slow drivers down in the school zone. A raised, is it the raised intersection? Is the other
Yeah,
one would like
right.
physically
That'd be
be
all of it.
raising the entire intersection. And so we don't have that in our city.
Right, yeah.
And but we don't want to have it necessarily off the table, but they could be very complicated with our topography and
Yeah, sure.
drainage and design, but essentially it's like a gigantic
Yeah.
speed table.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess the reason I bring it up, so a follow-up question is like, is it fair to say that this doesn't really preview or foreshadow anything with State Street master plan design treatments necessarily? Because I know that specifically was floated as like a major part of it.
I probably don't want to get in all the details for State Street, but that's definitely in the outreach and during all the, gosh, it's I can't believe it's like years now
Yes.
of outreach. So that was definitely a concept that was discussed.
Gotcha. I just mean like, so this is like, this isn't to say what's going to happen. Okay,
No.
right, got it.
No, it's just that typically if people want to know, like, well, what do we typically do? We wanted to showcase, okay, that these are the typical treatments. This is what we think or see important to us as we go through a lot of the collision statistics that I think should be priorities. And others, maybe it's not listed as a priority, but it's still something that should be under consideration when we think about our designs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? Go ahead.
I really like how this is laid out. I think to me, it's very simple, and the way that it talks about driver alertness, separate users in space, separate users in time, and then speed management, that to me is so clear and such an important way to think about this that I haven't really seen, I don't think I've seen in previous documents that we've adopted. And so I really like that, and I think that's like a really good sort of like moving forward to be like, hey, it hits these points, and then splitting it in like intersection, mid-block, and then programs. I just think that's very smart, and the way that it all is laid out is very clear. This is again another instance where like having a glossary is good, and I think you're going to show what they look like and all that stuff. And I love having pictures. You know, if we did this 10 years ago, we wouldn't have so many pictures of these things in the city. So I think that's a good thing to be like, look, this freshly painted, intersection or whatever. But yeah, a lot of these, I mean, this is great, and I think the way that it's laid out is very clear. One thing I'll just say about countermeasures is this mentions green conflict striping. There's not really a place for it in here, but I just want to say as a countermeasure, what kind of green matters, and if it's got reflective, beads in it is also important. There's very different green striping around town, different colors, and some of it you can barely see if it's dark or if it's sunny. Some of it, like the new stuff on Haley, I think is very easy to see when whether you're in a car or on a bike, actually on the lane. So I think those things are important to be like, no, but really do it in an extra safe way that's highly visible, not just, it's Malaga green paint with nothing reflective in it or whatever. So anyway, wherever that ends up, just know I've logged my thoughts on that one. Thank you.
Additional comments?
Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think I love this, and I agree with Committee Member Blackerby. I think it's a bit difficult to like digest every single one and think, do I agree with this is priority, this on Major Street, this one not? But I think it's a really good start. And I think a couple ones that I wanted to point to were the slip lanes not getting the priority to implement, I can only think of 2 slip lanes in town that aren't freeway related, and I think we should get rid of both of them, honestly, because I have seen multiple accidents in a very, like, just a year at the Las Positas one. It's like, and the De La Vina one, a lot of near misses, especially with the cyclists. And I don't know what it is about Trader Joe's, but anyone in that vicinity just loses all sense to how to drive. So I just put that out there about the slip lanes. I would love to get rid of them. They're just, I don't think they save any amount of time worth having them. And then the speed limit reduction, like, I think that's great for speed management. I just don't really think it works statistically compared to physical things. Like, some people, good people, will read the sign and make sure that that's the speed they're going. But a lot of people are just going to go the speed that feels comfortable and that the other traffic is going. Like MoDOC, people are regularly going 50 miles an hour, which is well over. So just call that out. But otherwise, I think this is awesome, and I can't wait to see it all with photos.
All right, last call for comments on this one. All right, we'll move on to our final section, the survey results for priority streets, which I think we mostly looked at last time, but yeah.
So this is the latest survey. So this is when we last had our hearing. We were going over where we thought on the high injury network were street segments that did have engineering solution potential. And where we're still on the higher injury network where we have stuff in design, but this was the in addition to. And so we had a survey specifically that matched our workshops as, do you feel like we should study this street further? Is there any other streets that are missing? So I think one of the things for the workshop, like people wanted to have a tie-in of Lacumba Road. Milpas was one. I think Carrillo was another that came up. And then it was an open-ended survey, and then so that it's gigantic. I did include it as an attachment. For me, going through it took probably almost 3 hours just to read through all the comments. I do take we take feedback. I want to make sure we're not missing anything. I think for us, there were 620 respondents. Which I think is really good, and the feedback generally was really good. I think there was some just kind of stock answers for each of the streets, like e-bike riders, or do enforcement, or no changes are needed, everything's fine. So what we were paying more attention to was, I live here, or I work here, this is what I see, and when I'm taking the kids, this is what this is our experience. So those were the comments that we really locked into. So we tried I still feel it's important because we don't want to necessarily re-summarize what people say. Like, we want to have all the raw comments in there. We only redacted, I think, like a personal phone number. Everything else is the residents' comments. And so, but I did try to attempt to do a summary of that. I used AI too, just to have some, kind of get out of our heads, and if there is anything different or observations that the computer was picking up that maybe we didn't. But in general, short answer is that yes, please continue analysis. And so that's what we're doing. Really, the whole month of March for us is just collecting all the, we had to do some camera studies. We're doing some on-street parking studies and on all of that. And then we'll have treatments. What's going to be different for what you see in April, we're not going to be laying out plans of entire concepts. You'll see cross sections for some of the corridors and little the circle here where we think curb extensions, lighting here, and it's going to be very simplistic icons. I think after we bring the plan to you, we did feel like it's important to have another touch point with the community just to go over those graphics one more time before we go to council. But anyway, the biggest comments were on Upper State, Las Positas, Kyriel, De La Vina, and Bath, of the 10 priority streets. So anyway, there's really, like, for comment, like, I don't want to, every resident feedback is valuable, and so it's not, we're not here as staff to debunk feedback, it just is. And some of our residents are just very straightforward and honest, for better or for worse. But I think it did affirm on the analysis that, yes, again, a preview of what we see major improvements on is Upper State Street, Las Positas, Kyriel for sure. So you'll be seeing those would be the multi-million-dollar projects, and the rest are kind of a little bit more spot treatments here and there to finish up particular corridors. So is there any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, and actually, I guess I'll start off with just a question to clarify, and I think you said this a little bit, if you just want to expand. Just looking at these first 23 pages before we get into the attached appendix of the survey results, they just look like they're formatted as like slides and as opposed to like pages in a report. So you're saying that like what the final version is going to be is more of the like expected possible treatments for these intersections?
Yeah, this was just like a summary, and we tried to like, I was trying to avoid a huge expansive summary report of the data, so it ended up being formatted more like a presentation of kind of bullet, like an outline for each of the street segments. So I think it just is for us, what you'll see for the priority selections. You know how we had the graphs for the safety and where we had like the collision history and the different icons? So what you'll see is something very similar to that. You'll still see the same street segment, but then you'll say, okay, what now that you see the collisions on this page, the next page will be what are the countermeasures because of those collisions. So that's what to expect to see. This standalone, the survey review, that it just is, but it's something that we just want to have context and feedback, because again, there's the engineering lens and what we think for design, but what really helps us to kind of finalize treatments is people's experiences and helping us prioritize what the certain values are on those from the residents. So that's the part that's really helpful for us.
All right, thank you. That helps a lot. Other questions?
Yeah, no, I definitely am appreciative of the AI summary because it saved a lot of time. I guess, so will we be seeing at the next meeting, like you said, cross sections of like different treatments of the different plans? Are you going to do like all 10 of the streets? Okay, gotcha. Are you going to do any of the streets, other streets that folks have suggested?
We will. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I think because we don't necessarily, well, Milpas, yes, we have the collision patterns for that, but yeah, we haven't figured out the format for that.
Okay, cool. That's my only question.
Comments?
All right. I think the survey kind of says what I would have thought about like the streets that people think are like the most immediately like needed, and I don't want to pick on the other ones. But like if I'll just reiterate, like I think that if you had to pick 10 and only 10 in the whole city, it would be the 5 you mentioned, and then like 5 just from like the tier 1 high injury network, just based off of safety data. And, you know, I'm treatment agnostic, but I think it'll be important, especially when this continues, to get feedback and like go to council, that to show that, like, you know, we didn't just stick to 10 prescribed ones, and we thought about, even if it's one block, one crosswalk somewhere else that we could throw in there, that we looked at it. Yeah, I think that's my only comment. Thank you.
All right, final comments? Okay, then I think we are ready for our final public comment. Do we have any?
We have no
commenters?
speakers.
All
Oh,
right,
okay.
go for it.
We have Barry Remis for public comment.
Part 2, 2 and 2.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted just a couple items. Certainly applause for the inclusion of the appendices and the toolbox, a visual toolbox, which really can be great benefit, especially to those lay people who are reading the plan, to be able to just get a visual idea of what countermeasures could be possible. Even though, and it's certainly exciting to see the thought of some of these taking shape in the city, like protected intersections and things like that. Also, getting back to, wanted to also stress the importance of the inclusion of the complete streets element and the nexus of that with Vision Zero. Just so much intertwining of components of safety for all road users, and that, you know, goes to the point that Committee Member Smith was making earlier about, you know, the speed variations and the fact that e-bicyclists can be traveling so much more quickly now, but at the same time, times have changed, and that the need for separation wherever it's possible is important, but to be able to, that element of complete streets, to be able to provide safety for all the road users, especially our more vulnerable users, mobility challenged, youth, elderly, et cetera. And then to get an answer to Committee Member Rodriguez before about e-bike education. It is a challenge when we go to do bicycle education at schools, to be able to provide, I guess, if you will, equitable training on different types of bicycles. More and more students, as we know, even in elementary schools to these days, are starting to adopt e-bikes. We are doing more e-bike safety presentations at schools, both elementary and junior high, and even high schools as well too, where we're actually bringing an e-bike as a demonstration. Again, it's not always possible that all the students are going to have e-bikes, so that when we get on the blacktop, it is challenging, although you know, we did recently do and look forward to, as well with the City of Santa Barbara for Goleta's e-bike safety awareness week, we did provide a community class and community ride as well too. So perhaps with Cycle Mania coming up in May, we can repeat command performance of some of the opportunities that we also did with the City of Santa Barbara as well. So it's just exciting to be able to see the continued evolution of the Safe Streets for All action plan, and we're excited to be able to see further public outreach and then the development of the plan so that it can be implemented soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe with that, have we completed all items for tonight? We don't need any motion?
I really appreciate your time. This was really great, tremendous feedback, and really appreciate it. And thank you for staying late.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. And with that, I believe we are ready to adjourn at 8:04.